Welcome to the Sunday Times Politics Weekly, where we explore the big political stories of the moment. I'm Mike Siluma, and thanks for joining us. The big story this week, of course, has been one of corruption, highlighted by claims by former Eskom CEO Ruyter of how corruption has brought the power utility to its knees. To help us understand the nature and extent of corruption in our country and what can be done possibly to turn back the tide, we joined on the Politics Weekly this week by Lawson, Naidoo, who's the Executive Secretary of the Council for the Advancement of the Constitution, as well as Wayne Duvenhage, who's the CEO of Ruyter, which is the organization undoing tax abuse.
With immediate effect.
When people saw,
and I quote, "In 2 years' time, Eskom's problems will be a thing of the past. People won't even remember load shedding," unquote.
They put saliva on the paper.
I'm in charge. That's why these fools are running around here. I'm in charge.
And then they share that zone.
Point of order, Chairperson. Point of order. The ruling party by point of order
Must step aside within 30 days.
No, I'm not going to apologize.
He has no brains whatsoever.
So the ANC president was sabotaged again yesterday?
Well, sabotage, that can be
This is not a shit.
Arms, can you please come in?
We welcome both of you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Nice to be with you.
Thank you very much, Mike.
When shall I start with you? Were you surprised or shocked by the revelations made by
Ruyter
in terms of what has been happening at Eskom?
Not at all. I think it's been well understood that the extent of corruption runs deep in Eskom. I mean, it's been going on for many years. You just have to look at the two big project builds of Medupi and Kusile, who were both budgeted around 70 to 80 billion rand, are both well over time and nearly 3 times that price. And those projects have been fraught with corruption, right from Chancellor House's investment in Hitachi before those contracts were awarded. But right now on the operating side of things, When Brian Molefe made the comment of, look, we don't want to own the bakery, we just want to buy the bread. This is the Tide Collieries to Eskom. You can see exactly the agenda. You give away those mines or you sell those mines to vested interests, and then you start paying for coal at market-related prices, international market-related prices. And our view has always been, if you consume the entire content of the bakery, you better own the bakery. But this is strategy that just was not well thought through. But we think the political intent or the agendas that were behind some of those decisions back then are now leading to the problems that we have. And then you get into the transport contracts. It's just a minefield of gross maladministration, which opens the door for gross abuse and corruption. And it is systemic now, right the way through to almost every level within Eskom, and it is shocking. So if you just look at the primary energy costs, how it's gone up over the last 15 years, you get an idea of the extent of what corruption and maladministration is costing us there. So we're not surprised at Ruyter's allegations. The sad thing is that he is tackled, the man is being tackled and not the ball. And government should have seized the ball and the opportunity and said, okay, you've got not evidence, but you've got intelligence, you've got information. Let's go and get to the bottom of this. Instead of doing that, they enter into a flat spin and start playing the man and trying to castigate him. And that's just the tactics of a very guilty party or guilty players in the scheme.
Lawson, I'd like for you to come in here. Wayne says that corruption has become systemic at Eskom. Would you say it's systemic in society broadly?
Well, I think, Mike, we only have to look at the reports of the State Capture Commission to see how deeply embedded corruption is within various sectors of our society. I'll come back to the issue of society in a moment, but it's quite clear that those criminal networks are still very, very much in place, despite all the evidence we heard from the Zondo Commission and their reports. We saw it during the COVID pandemic with the PPE procurement, that those networks were able to kick into effect very, very quickly and easily. to exploit that opportunity. And we're seeing it being, being more deeply entrenched in entities like Eskom, as well as other state-owned entities across Transnet and the like. And it points to the fact that we haven't dealt with the root causes of those criminal underworlds and the way that they operate. I think to a certain extent, the Zondo Commission scratched the surface of some of those issues, but there needs to be a lot more investigative work to be done in order to expose and extract those people out of these entities so they can, begin the process of rehabilitation and starting to function properly. But that's clearly what this all shows us, is that there's a really long way to go in being able to do that. I think the longer that we have these sort of levels of systemic corruption with levels of impunity in place, the more tolerant that we are likely to become of certain levels of corruption, and the harder it is going to be in the longer term to eliminate corruption from our midst. So that's a sustainability threat to the effectiveness of the state, but also the effectiveness of the private sector in South Africa.
Mm-hmm. When is there an indication from a rands and cents point of view of what corruption is costing us as a country?
It's difficult to measure it, but I guess one can put together some scenarios to get an understanding. Let me put it this way. We're spending about 200 billion rand a year on infrastructure development. If you look at the various budgets over the last 12, 15 years. And our experience on infrastructure spend, talking roads, talking hospitals, schools, RDP houses, is that for every road we build and pay for, we could have got 3, sometimes more, because there's so many middlemen in the deals that are being done. And when I say every road, maybe 80% of them, but a large percentage of them, houses as well, clinics, hospitals, schools, with the amount of corruption and whistleblower information that we're getting, it is rife from provincial down to local government level and up at the national level as well. Where we see what was going on, as Lawson said, on the PPE stuff. But prior to that, with Zweli Mkhize and the digital vibes, this stuff is happening all the time across all sectors. And if we take a look at it from that point of view, and the maladministration, the misspending, the fruitless and wasteful expenditure that comes out of the Auditor General's reports, I don't think I'm going to be very wrong if we say that 1 trillion rand has been lost to corruption and gross maladministration, in other words, wasteful expenditure due to a lack of proper systems and the capabilities that are required to run government efficiently over the last 10 to 15 years, at least 1 trillion rand. In other words, almost, or not quite, about 2/3 of what we have as a total treasury allocation for 1 year. And it's probably, if we go do the rands and cents and you start adding in what is lost just through incompetence, and people make money through incompetence. So it's part of the corruption chain. This maladministration is part of it. It's probably double that. And it'll be a good exercise to do, obviously using some very good criteria to do the analysis and the assumptions. It's a lot. And I, when we look at what we have as a country, the money that comes in, and not even getting into local government yet, we have enough to run this country very well, mind you, and deal with the social wage issue and all the systemic challenges we have. But we don't have enough when a large percentage of that is lost to corruption and gross maladministration.
Lawson, one of the questions that get asked sometimes is whether corruption is getting worse or whether it is becoming exposed more. Wayne has just mentioned the contribution of whistleblowers, in exposing corruption. But where are we at? How do we gauge our current state in as far as corruption is concerned? Is it getting worse, or is it just that we're getting to know about it because it is being spoken about more?
Look, I think that's a difficult question to answer with any sort of confidence. I think there's certainly greater awareness about corruption. There's greater exposure of corruption by whistleblowers, despite the continuing lack of effective protection for whistleblowers. There's been a lot more exposures by the media fraternity. So we're much more aware of what is happening. Whether it's greater than it was 5 years ago, I think it's difficult to say. But we have almost as a baseline or a benchmark what came out of the Zondo Commission again, to give us an indication of where we were at a particular point in time. And, if we simply take the recent allegations that Andre de Ruyter made regarding Eskom, one would probably say that in that space, it's getting worse because the level of extraction appears to be that much worse than it was before. And I think this speaks to the issue of the capacity of the state to really turn the tide against corruption. Which is not to want to sound overly pessimistic about that, because I think there has been some progress in that regard with the establishment, for example, of the investigating directorate in the NPA, greater resourcing of law enforcement agencies and the like. But it's a slow process to begin to see the results of those endeavors, and I think it's still going to be some time before we see, the visible results of an increased focus on combating corruption.
When the perception that one often gets is that it is the ANC government that is the source of corruption, in the country. Is that a correct perception? What about business, for example? Because even in the state capture report, many businesses are mentioned as being party to what transpired, in those years.
Absolutely. Corruption, as the common saying goes, is the other side. Business is the other side of the corruption coin. You have to have business to participate in the tendering and the contracting and so forth. So there's no doubt that business, but very often, those businesses are family and friends of people connected inside the system, inside the ruling party's control of where the spending is signed off and takes place. So first and foremost, you've got to ask yourself, well, who holds the checkbook? Well, government holds the checkbook. Who in government has control over the money that's spent? Well, it is the ruling party, and through its cadre deployment, where those individuals have been appointed in these positions of power, where decisions are made, contracts are given. I mean, we've got a number of projects on the go right now in the higher education department, right down into the CETAs, to NSFAS. It's just systemic. It's bad. You cannot believe. And how they set it up is through connected people setting up businesses, taking over small businesses, using those business license numbers, and they got no experience, getting the contracts at 3, 4, 5 times inflated prices, and then bringing in specialists as contractors to do the job. That's the typical modus operandi. So it is first and foremost an ethical issue with a ruling party. So it is an ANC issue. It is a political party, unfortunately, that has, over the last 15 to 20 years, allowed a corrupt mindset and psyche to permeate. So right the way through. So, 15 years ago, municipalities were washing their own face, able to, clean the water, the wastewater treatment plants, manage their cities. Well, now they can't. They just can't do it because they've run out of money, because it doesn't get to where it should. Treasury allocations to indigent household electrification, 80% of it in Parry's research is lost to the system. So the poor suffer the most. And the long and short of the answer to that is, it's first and foremost the ruling party, and then obviously the connected cronies who set up the businesses. And there are also some big businesses, by the way. We've seen the likes of KPMG, McKinsey, ABB, the list is long. They get caught up in this trap, and they pay the price for it. Sad thing is, nobody in business is held accountable. We want to see those directors, put behind bars, and nobody's continuing and carrying on all the way to the end when it comes to people involved on the business side and on government side. Impunity reigns supreme, and the feeding trough just gets bigger and bigger, and we are losing too much money now.
Lawson, how do we have these kinds of levels of impunity when we've got a criminal justice system in place?
Well, again, it's a question of the capacity of that system, the capacity of the various checks and balances within our constitutional framework, which were, seriously eroded during the Zuma years, as the Zondo Commission reports, highlight. And as I said, the process of rebuilding those institutions is taking time. And there's still a lot of work to be done, for example, within SAPS, which often gets undermentioned in this discussion, because it's not just a question of the National Prosecuting Authority, which is where the focus is most of the time, but they're at the end of a chain of events that take place within the law enforcement sector. So the investigation's got to be done by SAPS or the Hawks, or now in the case of the of state capture cases, in the case of the investigating directorate. So it comes to the NPA at the end of that process, and if the evidence is not there, it makes the NPA's job very difficult to successfully prosecute those cases. So it's a real question of rebuilding the capacity of those institutions, which, as I say, is underway. But also, I think, very importantly, is the role of Parliament in all of this. In Parliament, taking its constitutional responsibility seriously in terms of exercising effective oversight over the executive, as well as organs of state, which include state-owned enterprises. And Parliament has largely failed in that regard and continues to fail in that regard. So, with the example not being set at the top that, that the institution of Parliament is going to demand accountability, is not going to allow a culture of impunity to prevail, to make sure that people account and are held accountable for their actions, their mismanagement, and the criminal deeds. So it really does need to start at the very top and set an example, because it's about setting the agenda for the political world, that this is something that we will not tolerate in a democratic South Africa, and we're going to work together to eliminate it. Now, there are various, attempts to try and do this, including with the adoption by Cabinet of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy, the President having now put in place the National Anti-Corruption Advisory Committee. But those various initiatives need to work in a cooperative manner within a set time frame and be supported by the requisite political will from the very top office in the country, which is that of the President, to ensure that these things happen, that they're taken seriously, and that they happen quickly. And that's something where I think there's still some progress to be made.
Yeah. Lawson, you're talking about the will. Sometimes, when one looks at the levels of corruption we're dealing with and the deployment of violence and intimidation, even murder, the murder of, for example, whistleblowers and that kind of thing. I mean, the other time, I think even in companies, at Richards Bay Minerals, for example, one of the managers there was killed, possibly because of syndicates that want to get in and feed at the trough, as Wayne puts it. Do you think as a society we've got the stomach to take the fight to criminals, in that sense? One here thinks about, I don't know if you saw the movie The Untouchables, what it took to fight the mafia in the United States, that it can be very costly, even for individuals and for public office bearers, etc. Do you think we have the stomach to take the fight to the criminals in South Africa?
I think we do. I think the majority of South Africans want to do the right thing, want to assist in eliminating these levels of corruption, of exploitation of the public purse. But, as you use the example of whistleblowers are afraid to come forward because they don't get the protection. They get victimized in the workplace. They get harassed, intimidated. And, as you've given examples, some people have been killed. for simply blowing the whistle on corruption. So unless that broader society feels that they had the full support and protection of the state to work collaboratively in eliminating corruption, people are going to be afraid of coming forward, afraid of speaking out. And that's the kind of culture that we need to turn around to say that that's why this issue of political will is so important, that people need to be confident that if they come forward, they're going to be taken seriously. And we've seen the example, just last week with the Ruyter, as we started at the beginning of this conversation, that when he's made claims, whatever one may think of the manner in which he did so, the response to that has really exposed the lack of political will to follow this up. Andre is being blamed, for example, not reporting it to law enforcement agencies. He says he has. What does the minister do? The minister says that the board must investigate. Now, the board is probably the least equipped body to investigate the kinds of claims and allegations that Andre Ruyter made. So again, it exposes the lack of political will to find effective solutions to this, rather than simply going through the motions of saying, well, we're doing something, we referred it to the board.
Hey, Wayne, before we get too depressed about the scenario that we're focusing on, well, would you say there are any low-hanging fruits that we could pick to begin to deal with, with the scourge?
Well, to Lawson's point and what we're saying, the will by civil society and the various NGOs that are doing a lot of work in this space is there. But, it can be too little. So the ball is big, it's rolling, and we're picking up pieces to try and stop the rot. But if it's gathering more and more momentum, I don't think this is difficult to fix, but it does require the political will. So let's get back to the earlier question of Parliament. Very true what Lawson says. Why is that? Well, MPs are beholden to the political masters, and they're not going to vote against. So it becomes a lame duck. And we've seen that, various committees, lots of evidence put there. They've got some powers, they've got some oversight, but very little happens. We need electoral reform to bring about change. And we've seen our government has dragged their feet on that, missed all the deadlines, deliberately so, as far as we're concerned, to make sure that 2024 does not have a significant change in the Electoral Act, which is required from a constitutional point of view. So it'll start again, and there'll be another 5 years of mess, probably. The low-hanging fruit really is, for me, and we look at Rwanda and we look at, I'm not saying their system is perfect, but systemic corruption was rampant. 3 years later, it is tidied up, despite the fact that, yes, is it a free and fair democracy? So there are many examples of you can fix corruption. You can nip it in the bud. The longer we wait, the more entrenched it becomes. We need, right from the top, the moral courage and the backbone by a president to say, not on our watch. We're going to do everything. We're going to, if he just put 10 billion rand into the investigative directorate, the NPA, special corruption courts, you beefed it up with the best investigative forensics skills from around the world, if need be, and said, go and fetch, just go and fetch, stop this. That 10 billion rand we will save in the first month of lost money to this country. Just think about it. So that's what I would do. Why is he not thinking along those lines? Why are we not really supercharging the criminal justice system? Because corruption is the problem. It is what is dragging us down and killing our economy and breaking our SOEs. That's not a rocket science decision. But to do that, you've got to demonstrate it. It's a leadership issue. We do not have the leadership to drive the real big change in fighting corruption in this country. We thought we had it when Ramaphosa came into power on the back of an anti-corruption ticket and the Tumamina, campaign. Well, I'm afraid it's been a damn squib. So how else do we do this? How else do you start that with the allocating of the funds to the right places to fix this problem? It can only come from leadership at the top. The country will get behind those type of statements. But while you don't do that, I'm afraid it's going to take a long time. Hopefully, 15 months' time, 2024, brings about some change. Now, are we hopeful? Are we hopeful? Do we think it's going to happen? Not with the way we see the politics playing out in coalitions and the posturing and the political meddling. We've got some work to do to make sure that all the people who are not voting because they're now fed up and they just have nothing else to vote for must vote. We've got a campaign to drive as this country to make sure that everybody, the youth, get out there and vote in 2024 and vote for change, but do it in a way that's responsible. So we do not have graft-seeking, rent-seeking politicians in positions of power. We're on a very, very tough course, and I'm hopeful. I mean, this country's got the prosperity potential like you cannot believe, from tourism to industry to everything. We're just punching so well below our weight because we have allowed systemic systems and administration just to collapse to make way for corruption. So we can do this, but we're going to have to do it with a lot of effort and work by civil society to hold government's feet to the fire. But I just think they're getting brazen now. They just actually couldn't care the type of behavior we're seeing. It's quite frightening.
Lawson, are you just before we close out, are you as optimistic as Wayne is about our prospects?
Yes, I am. I mean, I think we will come through this. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be a hard slog to get where we want to be. And but I think if we begin to work collaboratively, if we begin to see the political world from the very top levels, that the rest of society is ready to roll up their sleeves and contribute towards making this country what it ought to be. But I think, just to come back to a point that was made just now, it's this lack of urgency of dealing with the issue. If we look at our grade listing by the Financial Action Task Force, for example, if you actually study the technical grounds on which we would deem to be non-compliant, they're really around issues of the capacity of the state to combat money laundering and terrorism financing and the like. And yes, government rushed and put the relevant laws into place, but the FATF were not convinced that we have the capacity and the ability to actually implement that. And I think that is symptomatic of the kind of problems that we face in this broad law enforcement space to deal with this sort of, myriad of issues, the state capture, corruption, money laundering, and the like. And, probably the biggest threat to us now is that of organized crime, which we're seeing in various sectors of our economy that are taking root. And so it needs a very deliberate attempt, and it does need the resources. And I think government is starting to put those resources there, but it needs to happen much more quickly.
Well, that seems to be all the time we have on the Sunday Times Politics Weekly this time. And I'd like to thank our guests, Wayne Duvenhage, who's the CEO of the organization Undoing Tax Abuse, or OUTA, as well as Lawson Naidoo, who's the Executive Secretary of the Council for the Advancement of the Constitution. We appreciate your time, gentlemen. I'm Mike Siluma. Until next time, do stay safe, stay blessed, and let's do good for our country.